Hello everyone, it's Danzy here, and before we talk about this week's episode, you might be wondering, Danzy, this isn't your usual vlog setup. And you would be quite right. The reason is that I'm currently doing a bit of a changeover on the area where I film, as well as figuring out my new HD camera, and just generally trying to make my videos look a little bit more professional and polished. Everything will most likely be back to normal next time, but if you're someone who looks forward to seeing my face every week, then I apologize. And if you aren't, well, you might actually like this video better then. So, unlike with last week's episode, where I just kind of wasn't into it, and it was easy to categorize as not really the strongest episode, at least for me, with this episode, I'm not really sure how I feel about it, to be honest. Or at least when it came to the second half. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about the stuff going on in King's Landing and Meereen. So, we start off with Grey Worm and Missandei, and I get the feeling that the showrunners are really trying hard to make us care about these two, and if it wasn't for the fact that we have about 900 other characters that need the development and the TLC, I wouldn't object to seeing stuff like this. It's not like I dislike them in any way, but I just feel like they're not really a screen time priority, if you get what I mean. Now, the Meereen Revolt I actually really liked, though. It treated the slaves like people and gave their side some attention instead of them just being something that Daenerys has to check off her list. There was also a really well shot scene of some of the masters getting jumped by the slaves in an alley that wasn't very long, but it had some really cool camera angles, I thought. Sir Barristan's wise advice is ignored, just like it was last time, but I'm glad that they're showing Daenerys in a little bit more of an imperfect light than they've painted her so far, and that final shot of her atop the pyramid really shows that she's starting to slip into being overconfident and overzealous. It's a change I really like because Greek characters are always going to be more interesting than black or white ones. My favorite scene again would have to be with Sansa and Littlefinger on his boat on the way to the Eyrie. It shows that Sansa's becoming more of a player than I think even she realized, and the longer she stays in the game, the smarter she becomes, and it's part of the reason why I love her character so much. So, if you hadn't figured out who Joffrey's killer was, it is spelled out for you here, and that's something I'm actually kind of glad for because I was seeing some pretty scary theories on the internet. And speaking of which, it kind of seems like Diana Rigg's guest star status is coming to a close for the time being, because Olenna is headed back to Highgarden. But it's a nice little touch that she's handing the reins over to Margaery as the most powerful Tyrell player left in King's Landing, because God knows it's not going to be one of these two. Margaery ends up sneaking into Tommen's room, and we get to meet one of his cats, which is a nice little Easter egg if you're someone who's read the books. I think it says a lot about Margaery that her skills as a manipulator go far beyond just being a seductress. She gets that Tommen isn't old enough to go for sex, so she treats her visit with him more like how a cool babysitter would tuck a kid into bed. Being someone that's been ignored by the adults in his life, he's probably ecstatic that someone's taking interest in the things that he likes to do. So, the last thing I'll talk about before we get into up north and what's happening there, and that real head-turner of an ending, is Jaime gifting Brienne with his sword. He asks her to find Sansa and make sure that she's safe in order for them to fulfill the promise they made to Catelyn Stark before she died. One change that they made from the book that I actually really liked was Jaime gifting Podrick as her squire, as opposed to them just meeting on the road later by happenstance. It's a nice way of streamlining something, and they did it in a way that was clever and made sense. So, all of this was well and good, and nothing out of the ordinary, really, for an episode of Game of Thrones, but then we get up north to the Wall. As it was established a few episodes, Locke is posed as a recruit of the Night's Watch in order to get beyond the Wall and after Bran and Rickon. It's also been made clear that Jon knows that Bran's gone beyond the Wall as well. And I will say again that I'm still more impressed with Kit Harington's acting than I've ever been. Whatever changes he's making, it's definitely working. The higher-ups of the Night's Watch know that there's going to be an election for commander soon, so they send Jon with whoever he can get to go with him to Craster's Keep, hoping that he'll get killed before he can get voted into command. So, we cut to the guys at Craster's Keep, raping the women there and literally drinking wine out of Mormont's skull in this really bizarre Hamlet homage. But anyways, they take the last of Craster's children out to be sacrificed to the White Walkers, and who should be nearby to hear the crying baby but Bran, Hodor, and the Reeds? So they end up wandering over and get captured by the Night's Watch members at Craster's Keep, and with them stuck there and Jon on the way, it'll be interesting to see if they actually meet, and for the first time in forever we actually get to see two Starks reunited, however briefly. With this being so different from the books, I'm a little bit worried, but admittedly kind of curious to see where they're going with this. Now, the real kicker is when we get to see more of the White Walkers than we've ever seen in either the books or the show. It takes Craster's son far into the north, where another White Walker with spikes on its head, almost in the shape of a crown, touches the baby and turns him into either a white or possibly even a full-blown White Walker. So, literally nothing in the second half of this episode was in the books. But, was it bad? Well, it was different. If you're a book purist, you might not have liked this episode because it was in no way a close adaptation of the original material, but I would argue that nothing was really out of character either. But in regards to the White Walker and the baby at the end, I honestly can't say if they're just making things up at this point, or if this is just something we haven't seen in the books yet. Unless we get a comment from George R. R. Martin himself, I'm gonna take most of this with a grain of salt. But what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm honestly still on the fence. Toss a comment below because I'm really curious to see what you guys have to say, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything. I'm Danzy, and I'll see you next time.